I'll come,
Oh,
Mary.
Okay. Now I've gotten this little message once that says my internet connection is unstable. I don't know why it's decided to be unstable. If for some reason I should disappear, I will be running with my laptop to a more stable area for the internet, but so far so good. So we'll keep going. Well, I really appreciated this invitation to come and talk about critique. Mostly I appreciate it because it tells me that this is a group of writers who's very interested in improving as writers. And the thoughts I will bring today about critique, I've gathered from many sources, and they really are to be adapted to you individually and to you as a group. So you'll, take what I throw out and throw it around and figure out what happens when you engage in critique together as a group. Now, I'd like to ask the question first as we begin, which is, what do you hear when you hear the word critique? And just quick answers.
Criticism.
Help. Dissecting.
I hear it as being a nicer form of criticism. I don't hear it as being, I don't know, negative.
Okay.
Yeah. I kind of hear it as a mix between read and respond and evaluate.
Evaluate. That's.
I hear it as helpful or hopefully helpful.
And we're all hoping for the helpful part.
Yes. Also objective.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Well, it helps me to know different places that you're all coming from on this idea of critique. The idea of criticism with good manners might be what you were saying, Myra. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
that sounded like it might be.
Yeah.
The definition I usually work with about critique is detailed analysis and assessment. And I did read a little piece the other day about the difference between criticism and critique. And the difference that this article brought forth was that criticism is judgmental and fault-finding.
Yeah.
Critique is more descriptive and balanced. So that might be one way of looking at it.
Good.
And when I had to come up with a title for this session on critique, I called it The Gift of Critique, because I really do believe that when you are a poet giving over your poem for critique, you receive many gifts, not just the underscoring of what really works in your poem or what might need some more attention, but you also receive attention.
Mm-hmm.
People who are critiquing your work listen to it, read it. And that's one of the things I think we're all looking for as poets. Somebody who will really look at this poem, will really listen to it. So that's a gift right there. And that gift is one that is very, that can be very expansive for us. And just being heard takes us to new places. And I think helps us to understand better what it is we are conveying. We know what we want to say usually, but whether that's coming across, you don't know until you have someone listen to it. So that's the gift I see there. And then on the other hand, the gift of critique for those who are offering critique is one of the things that I've been really high on in my poet laureate role, which is if I have to sit down and pay attention to other people's poetry, I have learned so much in these months of being poet laureate, because I've heard so many different voices, so many different takes on reality. The whole book, Yearning to Breathe Free, comes out of that kind of excitement that it is astonishing what people are thinking, how they react, and how their personal take on things can also touch the edges of other people's personal realities. So that in the personal, we become universal, and it's a lovely seeming contradiction that kind of enlivens us. So these are the things I wanted to say about critique, and I do have that handout, and we can do screen sharing for it as we kind of walk through it, and you can, ask your questions at any point, and we'll see what happens. Now I'm going to go back and share screen. Yes, there we are. Share. Okay. So this was the paper you received, and I did put on the cover, critique highlights both the strengths and the shortcomings. And this quote from Gary Studley, I thought was a good synopsis, that usually everyone attending a critique understands what's about to take place, the process, the timing of critique and poetry, the need for constructive feedback, and so on. There's often a knowledge too that they are not there to sugarcoat any responses. Simultaneously, a critique is not a place to attack the politics of a piece, destroy someone's confidence, or poo-poo their efforts. What helps is that everyone knows we are all in the same spot once, and we are there to improve. That's the overview. And because I think this way, I made up a chart. And on that chart are two columns, one for the poet who is being critiqued, the other for those who are offering critique. And I start out with the assertion, the same assertion in both columns: the poem belongs to the poet. Any reactions to that, or what did you think when you first read it or heard it?
Well, I think that many of us would certainly agree with that. We've often said that when we offer what we consider helpful advice, that the poet does not have to take any of it. The poet is not there to defend their choices. They don't have to respond in any way to the things that are offered up. They're merely thoughts from someone who heard the poem. That's it. They don't take ownership.
I think that
what
really
comes to mind for me is that it's a brave act to share one's work, because it comes from a very deep place within us. So we make ourselves somewhat vulnerable. And when we put it out there, we trust that that vulnerability will be honored.
Just sort of springing off that, I guess, Kathleen, I never realized until I came here how cathartic and how personal poems could be. I just have so much admiration for people who can put it out there and create a beautiful piece of work. I really, I love that. I'm envious.
Okay. All right. Moving on to the next point. Again, the opening line is the same for both the poet and for those offering critique, that critique requires openness and willingness. And you've already touched upon that in the comments that I've heard. For the poet, when you put your poem out there for critique, you are acknowledging that there's work to be done on this poem, or that you want to improve it, that it might not be in its final best form yet. And that's what you're looking for. And you are willing to receive critique in a way that builds trust. And by building trust, I think that's building trust for the whole group. As a group that works together in this area of critique, you really are there for one another. And the way in which critique is received and it is given help build up that group trust and that sense of solidarity. And then on the side of those offering critique, critique requires openness and willingness. Openness to read fairly, reflect, share observations with clarity. Any thoughts on that comment?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Mary Lee.
Oh, okay, because it keeps saying I'm muted, so I just wanted to be sure that you can hear me.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
I-
we can hear you.
Marilee,
Oh, okay.
I had, excuse me, it's Becky. I had asked for you to be muted at first because there's some rustling or something that was going on by your phone. And I had Mary Susan on speaker view and I kept getting your phone icon instead. So that's
Oh.
why. Just be aware if you're shuffling papers or doing something, it might be making a
Oh,
little
yeah.
noise by your phone.
Oh, okay, thank you. I just
But you're
wanted
unmuted
to-
now.
Okay, I just wanted to say that I think that in this group, we've all just made a really strong effort to make sure that our comments are, that we listen carefully and that we phrase our thoughts and our constructive criticism in a very positive way, and it makes people feel, with a goal that it makes people feel safe.
Okay. And that kind of leads us then into that next subpoint, which is willingness to offer critique that sheds light rather than doubt. And again, there are ways in which you can say things. If something is confusing to you as a reader of a poem, you can point out, right here in this line, I got kind of lost there. Which is easier to hear than hearing something like, that is the most snarled imagery I've ever read. No, and it's too confusing. But part of the art of giving critique is making statements about what your own reaction is. And that way it's personal on your part, which means that it's not universalized. You're not saying, for everybody everywhere, this is how it would appear. It's just, I kind of got lost there. And being able to say that and then leaving it to the poet to decide if she or he needs to find a way out of that confusion, or if you're the only one who got confused there, maybe there's nothing that needs to be changed or done, but you have gotten feedback as a poet then about one passage that you might want to look at, Or you might just want to say, nope, it's just exactly the way I want it. And there it goes.
I see it as when I get my poems critiqued, I try to approach it with the attitude that I am there to learn something.
Mhm.
And so whatever somebody suggests, I often jot it down and consider, yeah, this would work better. And if I don't like it, I can just ignore it, or, and I know nobody in this group is mean or, critical or anything, but I have found I learned so much from this group. And so, that's kind of the way I look at it. So unless they really attack me, I don't know my feelings are. So.
Mary
that-
Susan, I see Kathleen Herman has a hand up.
Okay,
Yes.
good. Because I
I
can't
was
see you all.
going to give a specific example of how being specific really does help. The poem I was working on last week, I have two very good friends who are hugely supportive of my writing, and I send them my draft to make sure everything's clear, because it's very hard for me to discern that myself. I know in my head what I want to come across, but did I communicate that successfully? And they both had the same reaction. Boy, this character in your poem is really scary. And I thought, gosh, I didn't mean to portray that character as scary. And so I knew just by changing maybe 3 words, I was able to clarify how I wanted that character to come across. So they weren't saying this poem is just dreck, they were saying this one particular part, and then I knew what to fix. So those specifics can be so helpful.
Yeah.
Good. Any other comments? I can't see you all on the video. Carol Geeg, I did see you.
Yeah, this is pretty brief. I think,
Hey, can I chime in?
Let's let Carol go first, and then we'll pick
Okay.
you up.
All right.
this is more a question, Mary Susan, than, well, in dream therapy, for example, somebody who wants to interpret your dream says, well, if this were my dream. And I think that's all nice and good, but in this situation, I'm just wondering, I'm wondering if it would be best to wait until someone gives their opinion, then you actually, you said this earlier, I just want to get clear. Unless someone asks directly for, what would you do, which we've done, and I've gotten some very good suggestions. But until someone asks for that, it wouldn't be necessarily good to critique in a critique way.
Yeah, if one of the statements that I've been going with is that you don't offer solutions. Now, if the poet says, I'd really like some help with this, then sure, the invitation is there. But for the most part, you express what you understood or what you were confused about or what you appreciated, and you leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Steve, you had something?
Yeah, I did. Sometimes I will present a poem where I might have something that I've read it over myself, read it over several times, and I think to myself, I can't think of a better way to express this than this. And somebody in a critiquing session will say, oh, Stephen, if you changed this line and that line, or you changed this and that word, it would flow more smoothly. And actually, when I look at it, I realize that person is absolutely correct. Sometimes that can happen. And I've had instances where I really forgot who it was I needed to thank for giving me the scrap of advice.
So again, if you would be helped by that, you can ask for it. But I think as an initial offering of criticism or critique, that you don't offer solutions, that you explain what your reaction was. And then if the poet says, okay, could you help me out with that? What would you suggest? Then you've got an open doorway. But it goes back to the poem belonging to the poet.
Yeah.
So first round anyway, or initial reaction, I would encourage you to just go ahead and again, give your response without offering a solution for how to make it better. But
Good thought.
yeah, things
Good
may
point.
adapt, and there may be circumstances where it works out differently.
Mary Susan, may I
Sure.
ask a further question along that line? I think some of us are more protective, perhaps of our poetry, perhaps of ourselves, and others of us are a little more adventurous. Very often I say to people, I'll accept any comment that helps make this a better poem. And by that I mean, you can give me a suggestion. Is that okay? Can one do that?
Again, if you as the poet ask for it,
Yeah.
sure, it's fine. Because that may be exactly what you want.
Yeah.
Yeah. Going along on this chart here, in talking about, for those offering critique, in making your critique, state your issues clearly and in neutral language. In other words, as I gave the example before, not to globalize and say this is the worst thing I've ever heard, but that I got lost here. Be specific, which is throughout critique, I think one of the most essential elements is to be able to point to a word choice or a phrase or a line or the title and say, this really spoke to me. I loved this image and you grabbed my attention here. That's very specific. And again, it lets the poet know what is communicating, what is being heard by what is being communicated. So it's the specific is always helpful. And then we say, accept the poet's style and topic. And again, you are speaking your own reaction and you are focusing on the poem, not saying, oh, you should have approached this differently, or I really don't think you should deal with this topic. The topic's there. It is in the poem. Your job as a person offering critique is to get into it, to address it. And you may say that, this topic is one that I just have difficulty listening to anything about. So I just, I had to back off. It brings up something, it alludes to something that I just can't handle. And again, if the poet gets that reaction from several different people, then the poet might consider, oh, well, maybe there's something about this topic that doesn't have wide appeal or that is turning people off. But it is there and it is what it is. So, and after accepting the poet's style and topic, I do have mentioned, don't offer solutions. The implication there being, if the poet says, well, can you help me out with how I could make that clearer? Well, then you're not offering, you're responding to a request. So that if we take it one step at a time, I think it makes it a little easier and more acceptable for poets, depending on how they're feeling about receiving your suggestions, to either ask for the suggestion or to just leave it where it is. Okay, I know that Heather has trouble with this. I'm just going to leave it there. So. And then going back to the poet, in this, Nancy.
I just want to say that I would say the majority of the poets in this group are open to suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
They're requesting anything that will make the poem better. But it sounds as though you're suggesting if they hadn't said that every single time something comes up, that poet would have to make the request individually for each instance. Is that right? Is that what
I don't think so. I think you know your group better than I do.
We do.
And you're going to adapt any of this to the way things have worked out in your group, what you know about it, one another already. So I wouldn't, I wouldn't say that this is a universal rule at all. It's just the possibility is there. And if you have someone new joining your group, you might want to have a period of orientation time where you get an idea whether the new person is receptive to solutions, or if they feel protective or threatened when you start rearranging their words. So, but you're the ones to gauge that. These are just general background principles.
I see a hand up from Carol. Carol.
Okay,
Gibb.
good. Thank you for being
Mary Susan,
vigilant.
I need some clarification. No, I am a little lost here. I've always felt that, if something evokes the emotion, then I think of that as a poem. And you said something about if several people in the group feel that it's not, for them anyway, it pulls too much emotion or it's too hard to listen to. I wonder, I've heard incredible, I used to work with sexually abused kids, and I think, and people have been brave enough, trust me, to take that topic on now and then. And I think it's beautiful. I mean,
yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying that, okay, never mind.
No.
I agree, Carol.
The poet is the owner of the poem. And the thing we're saying is that the people offering critique don't have the right to say, avoid that topic. They can say, I had a hard time listening to that, which is true.
No.
And at First Tuesday this past week, there were several poems, but I'm thinking of one in particular that just was layers of imagery and profoundly disturbing, but very true statements. And I sent a note to the poet afterwards, just saying, I was so impressed with your imagery and all of this, all the while you were taking me to places I did not want to go.
Yeah.
But it's a complex response. And I think I was thinking more along the lines of and I'm not saying this would happen in this group, but if you had a new member who wound up presenting a poem that was, how shall we say, racially biased in very unjust ways, or that would be your perception. I would, as someone listening and giving critique, say, I cannot handle that. And not because of fear, but just because I can't at this point. And that's part of the feedback to get. And if someone's writing about sexual abuse, it may be helpful to hear that some people cannot listen to it.
Yes.
But I hope they'd be giving more feedback than just the overall, that they'd talk about the specifics of these lines and this imagery. And you'll notice when we get into, how to structure a time of critique, that I think you always start out with some affirmation, that there has to be something that can be affirmed about that poem. And that's where you start as a group offering critique. And again, you're specific. So you can talk about this line, this paragraph, this or this stanza, this phrase, and lift something up that is glowing and vibrant and lovely, or glowing and vibrant and scary, but that really makes its point. So going over to the poet side again, I I have thought in terms of levels of critique, that one of the ways you might want to, and or maybe you already do, or you might not want to, but you might want to allow people to specify what level of critique they want. They may want no critique, and that might not be for every occasion, but maybe on a particular day, all someone wants to do is read their poem to a group. That's it. Or you could just want the level of specific affirmation for people to say, this spoke to me, I really admired this phrasing, what a beautiful image, whatever you want to say. And that may be the level at which a poet wishes to receive critique. And then the detailed critique would be more of a balance of things that were maybe problematic or maybe not. So again, the emphasis that the critique is the poet's to use or not. And again, on a given day or for a given poet, you may want more or less criticism, and you may even want solutions offered. But again, it's part of the mix, and it's possible to restrict the level of critique based on what the poet wants. Okay, I'm going to move us along now to this poetry critique checklist of possibilities. And this is not something that you need to do for every poem, that you need to have something about each of these, but these are suggestions. When you're reading a poem in advance of the critique time, and you might be underlining or circling those phrases and that are problematic to you, or the phrases that are marvelous to you. This is just a checklist to have in the back of your mind that might help you make your critique more specific. And we start out with this opening affirmation, which may be the level at which the poet wants to stop. But to be able to say, what did you really like about the poem? What stands out? What's particularly memorable? And again, to be specific about that. If the poet hears that 4 out of this group of people all say the same thing, then you know you've got a really strong line or a strong image there. Yeah, keep that. So that's that's something you learn, even if you only want to hear affirmation. You learn what is strong, what is compelling, what is vivid. And then when you're circling those phrases, you can look for imagery. Is there imagery that didn't work for you? Is there imagery that's vibrant? What about the language that's used? Are there fresh, compelling phrases, or do some of the phrases seem dull or cliche-like? Are there words that seem to be chosen in error? And I put that one there specifically because I still regret a critique group I was part of, where someone read a wonderful poem, but they used a word incorrectly. For example, the person might have meant to use infer, but they used imply, or vice versa. And I saw that, and I did not say anything. And later the poem was to be published, and I felt really bad because people reading it would make a judgment about the poet. And those of us who were around that poet could have alleviated that difficulty. So the necessity to be clear and to be courageously honest at times. Again, not putting it down, but to be able to say, now this word here, you've used infer, but did you maybe mean imply? And you can let the poet decide and maybe discuss what the meaning is. Of phrasings that seem dull or cliche-like, that's one of the areas where I know that I am always looking for feedback, because I want to hear things anew and I want to be able to say things new. And if I've fallen back onto something that's predictable or dull, I want to know about that. So again, it's a good way to point things out. And if there are phrases that are really kind of zapping, just kind of wake you up, make note of that too. And then you can talk about sound, rhyme, rhythm, meter, alliteration, repetition. Maybe that's something that you're not quite aware of, but you think about sound. Oh yes, okay, there's some good stuff there. Cold spots, are there wordy or slow parts that could be tightened up? Is everything in the poem necessary? And I remember from a workshop that was led by, what is her name? Diane Frank. I remember her saying in a poem, don't have any word in there that you are not absolutely in love with. And one of her tenets seemed to be that poems can always be tightened up, and you don't want to have to slog through a lot of unnecessary words. So look it over and see what's there. Clarity, are there parts of the poem that are confusing? And again, you're saying, I got lost here. I was confused. And you can leave it at that because it might not be confusing to anyone else, or the poet might want it to be suitably ambiguous at that point. You can look at the title, whether it suits the poem, whether it could be stronger or more original. How does the poem open? Did someone have something? Okay. How did the poem open? Was it engaging? One of the phrases that I picked up in doing my research for this was the word explanatory, that poetry is not necessarily explanatory. It is poetic. And you're being evocative, and you are using words that might even have multiple meanings, and you like that ambiguity. So anyway, that's one thing to look for, and I wouldn't have thought to look for that. Are the line breaks effective? Are the first lines strong and engaging? I already did that. What could be, is something missing? What could be added to the poem to make it more effective or interesting? And again, you're not offering solutions there necessarily, unless the poet asks for it, or unless you know from experience that this poet really would be open to that. But you might be able to say, well, I wanted to hear more about what this person you're writing about was like as a teenager. I wanted to hear more. I wanted to hear more about the color of the sky that made you know that there was a storm coming up. So that's the missing parts. And then, is the conclusion strong or satisfyingly iffy? Kathy.
I love this list because it is so specific, and it seems to match up with that third level of critiquing. You've got specific affirmation and you've got detail. And I heard you say that there's a fourth level, so to speak, which is that solution-oriented part that the poet can ask for. But all these seem to be, if I'm understanding correctly, on that third level. These are all the detailed things.
Yes, so except for that opening affirmation.
Except for the opening affirmation. Okay, which is where I'm going with my question.
Okay.
You mentioned that there may be, on a specific day or with a specific poem, someone may want no feedback, or someone may only want specific affirmation. And you mentioned that on a specific day or with a specific poem 2 or 3 times. Am I understanding correctly that the implication is that if you are in a critique group, unless you ask for that level 1 or 2, that on a specific day with a specific poem, that if you're in a critique group, you really should be open to all the rest of these suggestions being, not suggestions, excuse me. You should be open to all of these types of comments where people just give it to you, you know, short and sweet, and they are not going into suggestions. Am I correct in understanding that was that is the implication of this?
I think you understood very well where I was coming from.
Okay.
Yeah. If you are part of a critique group, then you've all agreed to critique one another's work.
Okay.
And
thank you.
Yeah, it's
thank you.
it's
That's
there.
a very important point, I think, to all of us. You know, and as we go forward, if people come in or go out, you know, that you know, there are all kinds of groups out there, poetry, that this is who we are. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Mary Susan, Kathleen Herman has a hand up.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Mary Susan, as I listen to you, what I'm becoming more aware of with these different levels of critiquing is that it makes so much sense as the poet to ask for, you know what, I just want to read it today, or this is an early draft. I know it needs a lot of fine tuning. I didn't make the best word choices everywhere, but I just like some general feedback. Does it hang together? Is there any confusion? Do you know where I am at a certain point in time? That there are different moments in the writing process as a poem is developed where the poet may need more specific or less specific feedback. So that's just resonating with me. That makes a whole lot of sense.
Okay. And yeah, and I would think that a poem that's, you know, you're just getting started on, I would want to have all of this because there's just so much there that needs to be worked on yet. Okay. All right. Anyone else? Carol.
Okay. Mary Susan, these are structural questions and they're not, why do I qualify everything I say? Okay, since we're talking a bit about structural, I just want to say, you do notice that you're doing exactly what you're saying when you're giving this, class. I mean, you're doing exactly what you say about critique. Anyway, my question is this, what do you think, 2 questions, sorry, spontaneity versus reading it beforehand. Is there some advantage to either in your eyes? In other words, reading the poem beforehand or hearing it the first time in the group? What is your take on that?
My take is that if it is a critique group, it's really good to read the poem beforehand and mark it all up and so forth. But that really is just my opinion. And there may be times when someone wants to come in and say, you know, I just want you to listen to this and tell me what you think based on what you hear. And that, you know, that's a valid way to go.
Well, just one more then on top of that, the comments on other people's comments. So if someone says, well, 2 of them, I guess, you know, if someone says, well, this reminds me of, how far does that go or should go? And the other is, you're commenting on other comments, not on the poem itself, but other comments. Can you help?
Yeah, well, given that there's a limited amount of time, I would stress making the comments on the poem.
That's what I thought.
And you know, somebody may say that, you know, this reminds me of, and that really speaks to me. And I'm so glad you put that in your poem. But it doesn't then trigger everyone else talking about whether or not they wanted it there, unless that was something they were going to say anyway. And that's another advantage of marking up the poem in advance, because you have a sense of what your issues are and what your concerns are.
That's much clearer. Thank you. I just wanted to get it. I do now.
Okay. Okay, I will move ahead unless there's anyone else. And I can't see you all.
Nancy Tolan. Nancy has a question.
Nancy. All right, let me.
You know, I just wanted to mention that the critique list becomes far more challenging when a poem is read, but no hard copy is offered.
Mhm,
We do run across that
mhm.
often.
Yes.
And so what do you think of that? And, you know, how we try persuading these shy people, but, you know, some of them are adamant, no.
Mhm.
Have you run across people like that in your critique groups?
I actually haven't, but then I've not been part of that many critique groups. And usually it was very rabid writers who wanted every kind of possible response to what they're writing. And also there is with all of our electronic communication right now, there is a challenge, I think, for some people in getting the printed version of their poem out or retrieving others. And, you know, that's a difficulty. I go way back to the days when we met in a room and everybody came in with pieces of paper that were the poems but the poems were passed out and then read orally, and then everybody read them as they went along and marked them up right there. So you didn't have that in advance factor, but it was possible to just do that and all share the same experience of it pretty much. So times have changed.
So I just wanted to comment on that. I think sometimes it's a different level of critique, kind of not reading it, but hearing it, because if we ever read at a poetry reading, that's what we would be doing. The other participants wouldn't be reading along with us. And it might be useful to me or another poet to get what does it sound like? How does it, you know, what do you hear, rather than having the advantage of reading it while we're reading it. I mean, you know what I mean? Seeing it on paper.
And we kind of go back and forth on that also at First Tuesday group, where we're just reading poems. But for some people, they really want to be able to have that poem on the screen so that people can read it while they are reading it aloud.
Right.
Others feel like, no, I don't want that distraction. I want this to be an oral, AURAL experience. So I think it depends on the poet. Again, what are you looking for, and what is the best way to get that?
Heather has a comment.
Yes, some of us are visual learners and some of us are auditory learners.
Exactly.
Yeah.
For me, I need the visual. If somebody reads a poem, I can't remember all the words.
Yeah.
And so seeing it in front of me and hearing them read it solidifies it in my mind. And not everybody is a visual learner, and some people are auditory, and I'm that way with music, but not the written word.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and for a critique group, I think it is even more essential that you have
the
both
visual
forms,
and the
hearing
auditory.
hearing and seeing. Okay. So we'll move on to the level of critique flow chart, which sounds very imposing. And that's where I did suggest that before the session, you print and read each poem to be critiqued and mark the specific lines or words that you want to affirm or question. And that's you as a person offering critique. So for the level of critique, very simple. If a poet wants no critique, then they read the poem and that's it. Moving down to specific affirmation, the poet reads the poem, receives the affirming comments, and may comment or not. The group members in specific affirmation respond to the question, what did you really like about the poem? What stands out as memorable? and you're specific in all of that. And the facilitator makes sure that the members address the poems with specifics about the appreciation and monitors the time. And that's, one of the one of the cruel and heartless tasks that are given to the facilitator, but really needs to be done, again, because of our limitations. And then for detailed critique, the poet reads the poem, receives the responses, may comment or not. This is the same each time. And the group members start out with an affirming comment, that positive statement about something in the poem. And you can refer to the checklist of possibilities for elements you may want to focus on. And as always, be specific and state your issues clearly and in neutral language. So those are the principles there. And the facilitator, again, makes sure the members address the poem with specifics, starting with appreciation and continuing to other aspects of critique, and keeps members focused on speaking their comments on the poem clearly and in neutral language. And then monitors time.
I have a comment, Mary Susan.
Yes.
So in this group, we split the chores of being facilitator and timekeeper, and that takes some of the burden off of the facilitator.
Good.
So that's I think a good thing to do.
It is.
The other question I have is, having been a boss for a number of years,
Yes.
and having to do performance evaluations, which I know is different from poetry critiquing, but nonetheless, one of the things that I learned from various training courses I took is to always end up with the affirmation, the positive affirmation. The temptation is to start out saying, by and large, your work is great, but blah, 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 these negatives, or, whatever. And then the person goes away with kind of a bad feeling.
Right.
So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about that, because you make it pretty clear that the affirmation, the positive things, should come at the beginning.
Well, there's no reason why the other comments that you're making can't be positive.
Right.
Because you're going over specific aspects of the poem. And yeah, the thing that I can't remember, I borrowed someone else's language, but saying that you don't want to leave the person feeling as though their confidence has been shaken.
Yes.
That you want to leave with a sense of, these are all of the good things that have happened, and where you can go from that. And I'm thinking, as we go, as I talk on here, that going back over other groups I've been part of, that I think groups evolve into their own patterns of, how it's good to end the critique session for an individual. And that may be part of what the facilitator does, is to kind of summarize very briefly at the end, saying, we've made a lot of comments about this poem, and really, I hope you've heard all of these strong affirmations, and the way people were really intrigued with what you have done with language at this point, and so forth. So that might be part of what you want to be sure happens.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Carol.
Just real quickly, that's exactly what you do in First Tuesday. Exactly. You say a few things right afterward. And frankly, when it's embarrassing, but I do wait for that, because to me, there's the positive ending, Becky. For me, it's like, oh, she liked it. No, I'm not kidding you. That's what I think. So I appreciate that, since you do already do it. Well, I recommend it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that mostly kind of developed just because with the Zoom format and not being able to make eye contact or, you know, see a lot of bodily responses, I wanted to make sure everybody knows that at least something that they said was heard. And then, you know, we often unleash the entire group to do that too. But as I move things along, it's very easy for me to just insert that so that we know that we've been heard and go on.
Yeah, thank you.
Otherwise, with Zoom in particular, you can feel like you're talking into a void. Okay, any other comments? Okay, I'm just going to take us then to two poems that I brought that we can just play around with. This first poem, Flame Agave, this is a poem that if I were in the critique group, I would say, I just want specific affirmation on this. I'm pretty much done with it. I wrote it a long time ago, but I'd like to know what appeals about this poem. And I think I might learn something from that. So did everybody get a chance to read it? And if not, I'm going to read it out loud and you can read it along as we go. At first, I mistook you for an aloe and was ready to go all poetically rhapsodical about the paradoxicality of your ability to soothe the pain caused by a blue gas flame for which you were named. Sorry, my bad. Sweet agave, you've been hyped and so popular for your nectar's enticingly low glycemic index, now discredited by the revelation that although native peoples used you well, modern processing shamelessly squeezes the healthy out of you and deploys your syrup as a raging fructose bomb to derange our liver function and make us fat. You are not what I expected or projected in my ignorance. Forgive me for defining you, refining you, confining you, not seeing you for all you are, beyond any one moment or setting. A flame, fervid, lush with rosettes, cascading over walls and boulders, fluidly juxtaposed against stern concrete, subtly slate gray blue. You go greener with age. Your graceful inturned leaves are edged with tawny gold. Backlit by the sun, your margins glow.
Kathy has a comment.
Okay.
What I love about this poem, Mary Susan, is how you have this balance between using scientific terms and, you know, quite complex sentence structure, like right at the very beginning. But then you become very personal. You go, sorry, my bad. And, you know, and I just love that. And at the end, in the beginning of the second stanza, you know, forgive me. And then you go into for defining you, refining you, confining you. And it becomes so personal. It almost becomes like a rap piece. And so, you know, you got the personal here and the scientific here, and you just meld them together. So I just, you know, it is just so relatable.
Thank you.
I'll go next if you
Okay.
don't mind. So I liked the playfulness of it and the fact that at the beginning you had all these ability, I don't know, I can't see the top of the poem
Right.
on the screen anymore, but there we go. Paradoxicality, ability, there are all these words that with similar endings that make it kind of fun to read. But you also have a comment to make about how the plant has been, if you will, bastardized by modern technology. And it's like you make an apology for how civilization has ruined a perfectly good natural thing, what we call civilization. Maybe that's not the right word, but I like that very much. And I thought that the way you ended it with just describing the plant was really reducing it down to its simple values, its simple natural values. And I thought that was a really great way to end the poem as well.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you very much. This is helpful.
I
I'm going to
love,
go on.
Mary Susan, that you
Oh.
took us back to the original agave, which we've forgotten. We're starting to think about farm to table, but you
Yes.
really take us there. So instead of the bottle on the shelf in the market, we see it in its authentic form.
And I've been meaning to get a flame agave for my garden. I haven't yet, but it will continue. Now, this next poem is one that is just got started, and there's a lot I don't know about it, and I would like to have your comments, the full critique on this one, because I need to know where I'm confused and confusing, and what works and what doesn't. Tentatively titled, Recorded Music, Ladysmith Black Mambazo. Enchanting voices suffused with harmonic edginess beckon me toward high plains and kopjes, drummed rhythms along the Zambezi. Dear, kind, courageous, witty friends I long to see, all of whom I am certain are hanging out together in the dusky cafes or within sight of the elephants on the ridge. And I could be there with them, but no. The pillars of imagination crumble under the weight of a virus that shrouds the world. No travel, no hanging out, no life as remembered.
Mary Susan, just a quickie notation did you misread the last two lines? You said no hanging out, no life as we know it, because it's written as no life is remembered.
You know, I hope I said remembered, because that's what I see too.
Yeah,
No life as
okay.
remembered.
But anyhow, I love the second part where you're talking about, you're painting a picture of a place, and it sounds just absolutely fascinating. But then you crashed out of that into but no, pillars of imagination crumble. I can visualize it all just falling apart under the weight of a virus. It's been keeping us all home for the last year or more. Love that part. Not the real part of that, but the way you described it.
Okay, so it was something real then. Thank you.
Mary Susan, I have the feeling of mid-poem falling off a cliff, and I think that might exactly be your intention. And then I go back to the title, recorded music. It's not live.
Mm-hmm.
Am I right in connecting those two together? That's why the experience rings more hollow.
Yes. Yeah, good. And I've had questions about that title. I used it because I was listening to music, and this all came to me, and wanted to pull me back there. And there was no way I could go. So yeah, falling off a cliff sounds right.
I have a question.
Yes.
Those words, Zambezi
Mm-hmm.
and Copsis,
Mm-hmm.
what are they?
Zambezi is a river that runs through Zambia, and it's a native title. And
Right.
Kopje is it's from the Afrikaans, which is based on Dutch. Kopjes are hills with the tops flattened out.
Right.
So they look like heads, which is what.
So
Kopje
I'm
is.
trying to find but something took me to another place.
Mhm.
I just like went into this memory of hanging
Oh.
out with very old friends at a Christmas time, something really sweet, babies, some memory that I don't know where it came from. And all of a sudden, I was gone. I was gone
Okay.
for, until that critique started. So I don't know if it was perhaps those words or
Mhm.
what took me, but I think that's what poems are for,
Mm.
in a way that
Okay.
to transport us, to bring us a real different perspective. And
So-
yours did it. And
Okay.
it's
So
very beautiful.
using
even though-
those words, even though you didn't know what they meant.
Right.
was,
I wonder if it is this drum rhythms of these words. I don't know what took me. It was interesting because
very
if I
interesting.
read it with my left brain, I really don't understand, but somehow my right brain took over and went traveling.
Okay.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
beautiful.
great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, Heather.
Thank you.
Well, I loved your use of words, enchanting voices suffused with harmonic edginess. I really liked that. And how the music beckoned you, you could see in the music, and this happens to me too because I'm a musician, that you could picture where this music was coming from and the people. Even if maybe you had never really met them, and you longed to see them, and you could not be with them. The pillars of imagination crumble. Now here, the way I would see it, maybe I'm making suggestions, I'm not supposed to do this, but for me, the pillars of the imagination would not crumble. They would stay there, despite the fact that I couldn't be there.
Okay.
That's just my own take of it. But throughout this pandemic, I have tried to, there are stories like about people that take positive things and keep them so that when times are rough, they can take their deposits they made in the bank and they can take it out and be able to withstand COVID, and it's just my own opinion, but
Yeah. But the underscoring of pillars of imagination crumble might be problematic. Okay, I will think about that. Thank you.
yeah, if you
Carol.
allow that imagination to overrun the things around you, just lose yourself in the imagination.
Carol.
Mary Susan, I have a wondering about your friendship with your kind, courageous, witty friends. And I wonder, I would like to know more about it. I wonder if
Mhm.
you would consider adding a few details about that connection, what it, describe it and what it meant to you
Mhm.
in the past when it was there before COVID.
Okay, that's a very good point about what's missing. So good. I could get some more specifics there. Carol, Guy.
Yeah, hi, Mary Susan. There are ways of presenting a poem, right? Many, and I love hearing the voice. However, I also, and you and Tom Tom does a little bit of this. What do you think of the singing of the poem or another kind of a presentation, the same poem,
Mhm.
but sort of shared in a different manner? I just wondered kind of what you thought about the previous poem I felt would be perfect for music. This one, not so much, but
Yeah.
how do you feel about that?
Oh, I love the idea. And
Good, good.
Yeah.
That's all I wanted to say. My question is answered.
okay.
Kathy
think we-
Monroe, you
Here
have
goes
your
the
hand
drum.
up,
Okay, did you have something?
but you're muted. There you go.
Mary Susan, you were asking about the title.
Mhm.
I personally like the title because the title took me to where you were right off the bat.
Okay.
So that when you started, you know, and someone said how much they liked the first line, and I would agree with them. It's a very strong first line. And so, but I knew you weren't there. I knew you were there in your imagination
Mhm.
because you said recorded music. So there was no confusion. And so, you know, I was following along your visual memories and your auditory memories of all this, and I really could see it. I thought it was a really interesting poem because it's not like other poems. To Carol's comment, I was thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if you read this with some drums in the background?
Mhm.
Not
Yeah.
singing, read it with drums. There was one hiccup I had that it threw me off for the line, and then I regrouped because I realized when you said, "Dear, kind, courageous friends," what happened to me in my head was that I thought you were addressing them because you like a letter, because you always
Mhm.
say, dear
Right.
so and so. That threw me, but it only
Okay.
threw me for about a line, and then I got back on top. So that was okay. I don't know whether other people had that experience or not, but I love the idea of the dusky cafes or within sight of the elephants on the ridge. You would just, you only need a few details in there to make to make your imagination be something that was based on real experiences. So I thought it was a great poem.
Nancy?
I like, actually, I had to do a little research on this. Mozambique. I don't know this singer. Oh no, actually it's a choir, right? A choral
Yes.
group. Yeah. So Mozambique, excuse me,
Mambazo.
Mambazo.
Yes.
Mozambique. Mambazo, meaning axe
Mhm.
in Zulu
Yes.
language. So anyway, so I like, enjoying doing some of this research. And I did like the line, "In the dusky cafes," or "within sight of the elephants on the ridge," because you're referring, I think, to two different groups. Your
Yes.
people here in America, and then the people in Africa. Is that
Mhm.
right? Okay, good. I love that line. The only suggestion I have is when you use the word cup cheese, it should be italicized because it's a foreign word.
Yes. Good point. Okay, thank you. All right, I think we should probably move on because there are other poems that need to be considered in this format, but I thought this would give us a chance to practice some of the ideas that I put out there and just see how they how it worked. And as the poet being critiqued in this instance, I was very pleased. So thank you.
And Mary Susan, we all thank you. And I'd like to shout out a special thanks to the Benicia Public Library and Fran operating behind the scenes. Thank you so much.